Okay, I'm going to talk briefly about thesis into book publication, very, very important. And I assume a good many of you in the room are doing thesis into book kind of things. Gone are the days just absolutely when editors will read unrevised theses. Doesn't happen anymore. I will sometimes I shouldn't have even started that sentence. Anyhow, okay, this is the sentence I wish I hadn't started, which is, I will sometimes read a sample chapter from an unrevised thesis if an author really, really needs me to offer kind of feedback. But it is generic feedback because all theses have certain things in common, and I can tell you what they are without even reading your work. And so I can kind of particularize my comments to your own research, but it's just good. It's good to just engage both with your peer reviewers and with your acquisitions editors in terms of the topic at hand and not in terms of thesis sludge that you need to skim off. Okay. There's also a practical problem, which is the Aid to Scholarly Publications program, which is our main funding body in Canada, asks you to demonstrate how your thesis has been substantially revised in order to consider the manuscript eligible for publication. Now, even if the ASPP were not a factor, for instance, we get authors whose citizenship is not Canadian and we cannot use this program in that case, I still ask authors to defend how their manuscript has been substantially revised. And if you tell an acquisitions editor that your thesis committee thought there was very little need for revisions and it was ready to go, that it sends up all kinds of weird antennae, and you'll be greeted by a Martian, not an acquisitions editor. So what you need to think of, it's sort of a Zen move, converting the thesis into book. So you may have quite a small topic. You want to expand the content in some way so it'll have the broadest possible appeal. You could make a provincial study national. You could cover a longer period. You could discuss implications for current policy or national issues. You will for sure want to tie it into the emerging scholarship that has been produced since you defended your dissertation. I know this is a luxury that most people don't have, but it's just lovely if you can put it aside for 6 to 12 months and then return to it and revise it. I find authors are always much happier with that kind of process. So I'll tell you some of the clues I get immediately, and Jonathan would and everyone would, that a thesis hasn't been properly revised. First of all, I get a table of contents that's more than 2 pages long. We don't need subheads and sub-subheads, and indeed, subheads and sub-subheads often act as stand-ins for solid, fluid, elegant transitions. So what you want to think of in revising your thesis are these transitional moments. So, for instance, the introduction to your book in a thesis will say, Chapter 1 will explore, Chapter 2 will explore, it's like an annotated table of contents. What we want in an intro to a book is sort of a portal into the main topics of the book itself. It should be exploratory. It should bring to the table all the questions your readers will have. It can set the scene. It should not include too much of what I call hard data or lots of information. To use a bit of a cheesy metaphor, which I use quite a lot, so I must like it in some way, but an introduction functions to a book as an appetizer does to a main course, and you do not want to feel full after you've read the introduction. You want to have your appetite whetted. Likewise, conclusions to your book, probably in the thesis it says, Chapter 1 has explored, Chapter 2 has explored. That's a framing device, right? And what we want to do in a conclusion to a book is lead readers' minds out of the book, or these are the kinds of assumptions my research has unsettled. Here's some directions for future research. Let me draw the strands of the argument together, and so on. So those are 2 things. Another really obvious thing, like the table of contents, are the notes. Authors are very wedded to notes. Publishers all wish they would be reduced. And remember, I think this is the case with most of us, that we use EndNote, the EndNote system, not the footnote system. Personally, I love footnotes, but I don't think you can convince publishers in Canada, so much of that. Anyhow, so they are actually marginalized and relegated quite physically to the end of the book anyhow. And I have asked a number of very trusted reviewers, do you read the notes? And, you know, I don't take offense if you don't. Well, I sort of do, but to get an honest answer, you have to say that. And half of them say to me, no, I look at the notes that are relevant. I look at the notes that interest me. And so the ideal is that notes contain source material pretty much exclusively. If you have a digressive, interesting sidebar, chop it. That's hard. Or integrate it. If it's integral, it can be integrated. And so that's another sign. The last thing in terms of framing devices is you don't want, when I read a manuscript, I ask myself, what is there about this that necessitates its publication as a book, as opposed to a series of journal articles? And part of that is stylistic. So I should know what's coming up in chapter 3 by the end of chapter 2, because it will have paved the way for it. And so you don't want to have something called introduction and conclusion to each chapter, where you say what will be explored and what has been explored. You want to use both parts to kind of hold hands with the previous chapter and the chapter that's coming up.